disgusted face and said,
What can you do?
It was understandable. Her heart was afflicted by a rare disease. Help was not something to be lightly spoken as a mere comfort. First off, I'm just a guy working at her favorite cafeteria. Nevertheless, a month later, I found myself present at the scene of her surgery. Her doctor declared, giving up on her.
Her body won't last. She can last 10 more minutes at most. Anything I do would be medical malpractice.
I made up my mind and spoke out. The next moment, what happened to her? I am David Johnson. I'm a 43-year-old working part-time in a hospital cafeteria for the past 3 years. Being jobless at this age, I'm definitely at the bottom of the barrel. At work, I don't talk much, just quietly continue peeling vegetables and such. I know I'm talked about behind my back as inscrutable and looks like a criminal, but I don't care. The criminal part isn't too far off the mark. The cafeteria I work in is open to non-hospital staff as well. Many office workers from the neighborhood come by for lunch. Whenever one of the regulars came in, the male staff started buzzing.
Look at that, the beautiful chick is here again today.
I couldn't stand it and told one of the members, you shouldn't be using terms like chick these days. Not to mention, judging customers by their looks is not the way to go. Then, they looked embarrassed.
Shut it.
Yo, our bad, okay?
Saying so, they walked away. It seemed I became even more disliked. Worse yet, she had heard it herself. I knew because she was staring right at me. One afternoon, when I happened to stop by a local used bookstore, she approached me and said,
You work at the cafeteria, right? Hi, I'm the beautiful chick.
She said with a laugh. I wanted everyone to understand how awkward I felt. She thanked me for calming down the noisy men every time she came, saying,
That was refreshing. Thank you.
She was annoyed by their behavior, but she found the cafeteria, being the cheapest option around, very convenient.
I'm always broke. Eating there is cheaper than cooking for myself, not to mention I don't have the time.
She said as her stomach conveniently growled. There's a good diner nearby. How about joining me? When I invited her for a meal, she smiled wryly and said,
Yes, I'd like to take you up on that offer.
I insisted. Of course. But felt a pang of guilt. Not that I was making a fuss like the others, but for some reason, she had always intrigued me. It wasn't just because of her looks. Why? I didn't even know. She gobbled down the diner meal I treated her to, and shared many stories with me. Her name is Sarah Thompson. She joined the American branch of a famous German stationery brand near the cafeteria 5 years ago. Now, she's in sales.
I've always been interested in Germany.
She said. What she was looking for in the bookstore earlier was German classic literature. She likes Goethe and Kafka.
You know, those without covers and full of stains, sold for just 50 cents each.
She said, due to financial reasons. She grew up in a poor family. I also was raised in a poor family, and liked German literature. Our conversation became animated as we shared our memories, but there were subtle discrepancies in the details of the stories.
The impression really changes with different translations.
She seemed to have understood. The next day, when Sarah visited and smiled at me, saying,
Hi, David.
I was subjected to the envy and jealousy of my co-workers. What romance could there possibly be between a man over 40 and a 27-year-old woman? That being said, there was something about her that intrigued me. While she was about to eat, a man in his late 20s, wearing a hospital employee badge around his neck, came over. When I went to take his order, he didn't even look at me and said,
I'm not a customer of this kind of place.
He turned his body toward Sarah.
Eating out when you can't even afford surgery? Please think a bit more about it.
I wondered if they knew each other. I couldn't help but intervene. Sarah doesn't have time to cook for herself, and it turns out this cafeteria is cheaper than cooking at home. I told him. He replied with a straight face.
I've never had money troubles. Isn't that just a lack of effort? Anyway, please reconsider,
He said to Sarah before leaving the cafeteria. She was looking down. Sarah, are you okay? When I spoke to her, she made a face like she was crying and laughing.
Yes, I'm fine, thanks.
Sarah was a patient, and that arrogant man was her primary doctor. I gathered from the conversation that she was refusing surgery. Then, I went to visit a friend of mine, Tim Brown, the chief surgeon at the hospital.
Hey, David. How's it going?
He welcomed me into his home with a friendly attitude. You haven't been to the cafeteria recently. What's up?
Well, my wife has taken it upon herself to make sandwiches for me. So, I lost my reason to go there.
Even though I'm there.
Don't be so jealous.
He was the one who had introduced me to the part-time job at the cafeteria. However, I had no expectation of getting detailed information about the hospital from him. With that in mind, I started the conversation lightly, as if I were just complaining about that doctor's arrogance. You know, I've recently gotten to know a woman who comes to the cafeteria. Her name is Sarah, and she is apparently a patient. One day, a man who seemed to be her primary doctor approached her and said things like, eating out when you can't afford surgery, and isn't that just a lack of effort? Do you know anything about that? He hummed.
Okay.
And crossed his arms.
Well, first off, Sarah has a hereditary heart condition. The guy you mentioned is the primary doctor named Michael Smith, and is an elite from a national university. His skills are, well, decent, but he's just really bad at empathizing with patients. He's not a bad guy, just really bad at choosing his words. But he means well. He truly cares for his patients, so don't be too hard on him.
He went on to spill all the inside details, and I lectured him on professional ethics. I understand that Dr. Smith isn't a bad guy, but Tim, aren't you sharing a bit too much? I mean, I did ask to hear it, but I wonder if it's really okay to spill so much insider information. He responded.
Normally, you might be right. But you need to know about Sarah's condition.
I understood his reply, but my heart felt heavy. When I heard her name, I had a suspicion. Okay, thanks for telling me. It's like, fate exists, you know.
Seems like you can't do anything bad, right? Hang in there, David.
On my way back from Tim's house, as I passed by a small park, I heard someone sobbing deeply. I instinctively looked over and saw a woman sitting on a bench. It was Sarah. I went into the park. She looked up suddenly and saw me.
David.
Sarah, what's the matter? If there's anything, I'm here to listen. I offered, despite knowing the reason for her tears. I felt cowardly. When she told me about her illness and how she lost her mother to the same disease 5 years ago, I clenched my jaw tightly. Her mother didn't inform Sarah, who was a newbie in training at the time, about the worsening of her condition before the surgery. After everything was over, her brother Ryan told her.
The surgery didn't make it in time.
Ryan had started working early to support Sarah's education.
I couldn't be there for my parents' last moments, and I've been nothing but a burden to my brother.
She shared.
I'm supposed to have only 6 months left without surgery. But I can't tell my brother. He would surely do whatever it takes to pay for my surgery, whether it could save me or not.
I'll help you. I interrupted, saying it out loud. She looked at me with a tired expression and said,
What can you do?
It wasn't unreasonable. Help isn't something that should be said lightly, not even as a consolation. Yet, I was determined. Sarah stopped coming to the cafeteria the next day. The staff was disappointed, asking me if I knew anything, but I brushed it off. Though inside, I regretted saying, "I'll help," wondering if it was too presumptuous of me. I wished I could have conveyed it in a way that Sarah would have been more accepting of. Then, I told my workplace I would need about a month off. As expected, they weren't thrilled.
Fine, but can you tell us the reason? It's going to be tough for us if you take such a long break.
I thought it was a fair point. It's to help someone important to me. Needless to say, the manager was full of question marks. During that month, a lot happened. Through a contact, Sarah's brother Ryan learned about his sister's condition and arranged the money for her surgery. The date for Sarah's surgery was set, and Dr. Smith was the attending physician. There, Tim asked to observe as the chief.
I want to see the skills of yours, a young elite.
Tim said to Dr. Smith, who looked at him suspiciously and asked,
Why would someone as skilled as you be interested in my surgery? And with your busy schedule, why such an unreasonable request now?
Apparently, Tim made up some excuse. Hearing this story, I deeply thanked and apologized to my friend. On the day of the surgery, I entered the operating room with Tim. Dr. Smith unrecognized me because of the mask and protested.
Why is an outsider here?
But Tim insisted.
He's involved too.
Dr. Smith's skills were indeed reliable. I was reassured that Sarah was in good hands. But when he had completed about 90% of the procedure, he instructed the nurse to start suturing, intending to finish the surgery. Involuntarily, I raised my voice. "It's not over yet." To which Dr. Smith said,
The patient's body won't last. She has at most 10 more minutes. Any careless move would be medical malpractice, but if we stop now, her continual refusal of surgery was nothing but a consequence.
I couldn't accept such logic. When I shouted, "Give me 5 minutes, hand over the scalpel," Tim declared.
I'll take responsibility. Let him do it.
Reluctantly, Dr. Smith gave me his place. I took the scalpel and moved my hands carefully, yet swiftly. Witnessing my dexterity, Dr. Smith couldn't help but express his admiration.
Incredible. I've never seen such quick and precise movements.
5 minutes later, the surgery was a success. Seeing my unmasked face afterwards, Dr. Smith grunted.
Why is a cafeteria guy doing this?
The next day, back at the cafeteria after taking a month off, and receiving a sarcastic remark for it, Dr. Smith came in. When I said, "I thought you weren't a customer here," he humbly apologized.
I'm sorry for what happened before.
He told the manager he was borrowing me, then sat down and bombarded me with questions. When he asked if I was a doctor, I replied, "As you guessed, until 5 years ago." In that month, I had crammed Tim's surgeries to fill the 5-year gap, occasionally performing the surgeries myself to regain my instincts.
Where did you acquire such skills?
When Dr. Smith asked, Tim interrupted us.
I have something to tell you both.
Behind Tim was a man. It was Ryan Thompson, Sarah's brother. As the four of us moved, Tim continued to speak alone. He was getting glared at by the hospital director for letting an outsider perform surgery.
So for the next surgery, I'd be happy if David and Dr. Smith could work together nicely,
he said. Sarah needed one more final surgery. The previous one was just to get her into a state where she could receive it. The four of us surrounded Sarah in her hospital room. Then, Dr. Smith told her I had performed the surgery. She asked,
"You really saved me. But who are you?"
Dr. Smith looked at me to expect an answer. I started by mentioning Goethe and Kafka. I had read them in their original language during my student years in Germany, meaning, I had specialized in medicine at a German university. Born into poverty, my father had collapsed from overwork. I studied hard, wanting to ease my mother's burden and to prove myself, eventually earning a scholarship to study in Germany. My travel expenses were covered by a sponsor. Furthermore, Education in Germany was free. Specializing in medicine was significantly cheaper than in the US. In Germany, a doctor's value isn't determined by their educational background. It's complete meritocracy. If you don't leave achievements, you won't be treated as a full-fledged doctor. When I mentioned that, Dr. Smith had a confused look on his face, but I put that aside. By 35, I had become a specialist in cardiac surgery. Engrossed in my relentless days, I had cut off contact with my mother. She fell ill and passed away without my knowledge. Later, I learned that my mother had funded my trip. Overwhelmed with grief, an invitation from a hospital in the US reached me, and longing for my deceased parents, I decided to return to the States.
I see. You attended that university to perform surgeries in America.
Dr. Smith realized. I got into the university through the connections of the director of my former workplace. 4 years later, I met Tim at the hospital where I worked, and then,
I was the one who operated on your mother 5 years ago.
I disclosed to Sarah. Hearing her last name, Thompson, had given me a premonition. From what Tim shared, I learned Sarah was the daughter of that patient, the one I had regrettably failed. Unable to bear the atmosphere, I fled to the rooftop. As I slumped against the fence, Tim approached me, saying,
Running away again?
I couldn't be as strong as him. Back then, I was supporting the then director. Though I was supposed to be the primary surgeon, the director wanted to tackle the case himself, aiming to be the first successful American surgeon in that particular operation. Eager for recognition, he ignored my warnings and handed me the scalpel only when it was almost too late. But, just like Dr. Smith intended yesterday, I ended up abandoning the surgery. I was rushing for success too. I had just returned to the US and started working as a doctor. I desperately wanted to avoid any actions that could be seen as medical malpractice. Only after everything was over, and I saw the patient's family crying, did I fully grasp the gravity of the situation. I quit being a doctor. Meanwhile, Tim made significant contributions by exposing numerous malpractices of the director, eventually forcing him to resign. Initially, Tim had harbored resentment against me, the elite introduced by the director after returning from Germany. However, my earnest and overly serious nature, my late-night case studies, and the way I personally addressed each patient stripped away his hostility, leading to a friendship. That's why he decided to take down the former director, Tim explained. I wanted to end the kind of sorrow of losing a loved one unknowingly, like Sarah and I had experienced. As I expressed my regrets to the Thompson siblings, they told me,
Don't keep blaming yourself for our mother's situation.
Right. You did the best you could. You've been too hard on yourself for too long. It's time to stop.
Sarah said with a smile.
As proof of my forgiveness, I want you to perform my last surgery.
I looked up. My vision blurred with tears, but her beautiful smile was unmistakable. On the night before the surgery, I sat beside Sarah's bed.
David.
Sarah began.
If I get better from this illness, I want to go to many places. Like Germany.
That sounds nice.
Would you come with me? I'd feel lonely by myself. With you, who lived in Germany, I think it'd be fun.
I took her hand.
Sure, we'll go together. So, please don't lose hope.
I'm okay. I've made it this far because you've led me.
She smiled.
David, I like you.
I didn't know how to respond.
I think you just temporarily like me because I'm treating you.
Then, she looked upset.
That's not true. My feelings are real. After this surgery, I'll pursue you.
Hearing her say that, with a tone that was half joking yet seemed serious, I panicked.
Please, be sensible, Sarah. I'm 40, and you're 27. The age gap is too wide.
Age doesn't matter. It's the feelings that are important.
Her eyes were burning with passion. I was drawn to their brightness. She was beautiful. I was captivated by the light emanating from her. I thought she would surely be okay. She would definitely overcome the surgery next day.
Dr. Johnson.
She said softly.
Please take care of me tomorrow.
Yes. 6 months later, I was having a meal in the cafeteria as a doctor of the hospital.
Doctor, how are you today?
It's hot again today.
The same folks who ridiculed and looked at me coldly treated me with utmost respect as they knew I was a doctor. It didn't sit well with me. In fact, it was off-putting. However, the cafeteria was cheap, and it would be foolish not to use it. Since then, I had returned to the hospital as a specialist in cardiology. The current director had no choice but to acknowledge my skills. Dr. Smith, who had been pampered due to his family background and educational credentials, admired me and provided various supports. Through our encounter, he reflected on his own narrow-mindedness and arrogance. He's fundamentally an honest man. Family background and educational credentials mean nothing. Facing patients with all one's heart and soul, and taking responsibility for one's mistakes. What's important is that. Dr. Smith said he was impressed by my attitude, but I was just running away. It wasn't anything commendable. After finishing my lunch at the cafeteria, I ended my day's work. I was ready to return in case of an emergency, but there was an appointment I couldn't miss. Heading to the parking lot, I met up with Ryan, who drove us to the cemetery. I thought about the life I couldn't save. How many times had I wished she were still alive? I no longer remember. Kneeling with hands clasped in prayer at the grave, I apologized for my inadequacies and cowardice.
Ms. Thompson, I couldn't save you. I have never forgotten that. No matter how many times I apologize, it will never be enough. I thought I would always bear this guilt. But your daughter and son have forgiven me. However, I will never forget about you.
Then, a gentle autumn breeze caressed my cheek. It felt as though she was saying, "It's okay now." Is this an egoistic way of thinking? There, Sarah slightly delayed came, and bustled in.
David,
She said.
work took longer than expected. Sorry, Mom, I'm here now. I love you.
Sarah was busy with handovers, as she was about to take a long vacation. After the successful surgery, I faced her vigorous pursuit.
We share hobbies, you saved my life, and besides, you're unusually serious. How could I not fall for you?
Her push was strong.
Even a beautiful chick like me doesn't satisfy you?
Initially, I rejected her citing the age difference, but the reason wasn't just that. Considering I couldn't save her mother, she said.
I've forgiven you, my mother isn't the type to keep blaming people. And how long do you plan to blame yourself?
She also said I should bear my burdens differently. Thus, I decided to become a doctor again, extending my hand further than I could for the life I couldn't save.
Come on, let's report together properly.
Urged by Ryan, Sarah and I clasped our hands in front of the grave. We're getting married soon. Sarah couldn't bear to see me, who was very intimidated. She quickly made arrangements for our wedding. Our honeymoon destination is Germany, a place of memories for me and a dream for her. I don't know how I'll live from now on. The job unavoidably results in involuntary outcomes. But if Sarah is by my side, I can face it. In front of this grave, to my own soul, I vow not only to receive but also to make this unique woman named Sarah happy.